Why did Russian President and former KGB intelligence officer Vladimir Putin, who is the second longest-serving European president after his friend Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus, proclaim that Russians and Ukrainians are one people, one whole? All answers are in history. So let us take a look at the history of today's Ukrainian territory, settled since 32,000 BC, with evidence of the Graffitian culture in the Crimean Mountains. In the 7th century, the territory of present-day eastern Ukraine was the center of ancient Greater Bulgaria. Most Bulgarian tribes migrated in different directions at the end of the century, and the Khazars took over most of the land. In the 8th century, the Vikings arrived, and the area became a melting pot of Eastern Slavic culture founded by the Vikings and known as Kievan Rus, from which the name Russia comes. In today's video, learn more about the strong and complex history of what was once the most populous and industrialized republic after the Russian Soviet Republic and Ukraine. Like, share, and leave a comment. We love to join a discussion that follows every great history. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring facts. Kievan Rus, the first East Slavic state founded in 862, was a medieval political federation on the territory of modern Belarus, Ukraine, and part of Russia. Rus was ruled from the city of Kiev, and thus Kievan Rus meant the lands of Rus and Kiev. The prevailing theory is that the name Rus, like the Proto-Finnish name for Sweden, Ruotsi, is derived from an Old Norse term for men who row, since rowing was the main method of navigation on the rivers of Eastern Europe, and may be related to the Swedish coastal area of Roslagen, Ruslaw, or Roden, as it was known in earlier times. The name Rus may have the same origin as the Finnish and Estonian names for Sweden, Ruotsi and Ruotsi. The Vikings founded Kievan Rus in the mid-9th century, but Scandinavian settlements in Eastern Europe date back to at least 750 AD, when the Scandinavians probably settled the northwestern Russian town of Staraya Ladoga, or Old Ladoga, on the other side of Lake Ladoga, in what is now Finland. One of the artifacts archaeologists have unearthed in the town is a talisman with the face of Odin, the Norse god of war. The regular flow of Islamic coins from Russia to Scandinavia via Ladoga began in the early 9th century, and is further evidence of the Viking presence in Ladoga long before 840, when the Scandinavian Vikings established rule over the Slavic tribes in the area, later called Kievan Rus. From the 6th century BC, Greek, Roman, and Byzantine colonies were founded on the northeast coast of the Black Sea, for example, in Tyrus, Olbia, and Chersonesus. These flourished until the 6th century AD. The Goths remained in the region, but came under the rule of the Huns from the year 370. Kievan Rus was largely pagan until the end of the 10th century, when Vladimir the Great took power and introduced Christianity. The conversion was the result of an agreement between Vladimir and the Byzantine emperor. Vladimir agreed to convert to Christianity and send the emperor 6,000 soldiers to defend his throne. In return, Vladimir would marry the emperor's sister. In addition, the agreement led to the spread of Byzantine culture in Kievan Rus, so Vladimir built churches to spread Christianity and schools to promote literacy. The economy flourished, and Kievan Rus continued to expand until it was beset by royal infighting. The Crusades brought further instability, so that by the time of the Mongol invasion in the 13th century, Kievan Rus was in a state of collapse. When wars broke out in the vast territory in and around Ukraine, the neighboring Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania benefited, ruling for a short time until the middle of the 13th century, when the Republic of Genoa came and colonized the land, ruling until the end of the next century. Genoa founded numerous colonies in the Black Sea region of what is now Ukraine and turned them into important trading centers headed by a council, a representative of the Republic. In 1569, the Union of Lublin established the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and most of the Eastern European region of Ruthenia was ceded by Lithuania to the Crown of the Kingdom of Poland, thus legally becoming Polish territory. Under the pressure of Polonization, many Ruthenian landed nobles converted to Catholicism and joined the circles of Polish nobility. Having lost their native protectors among the Rus nobility, the peasants and townspeople turned to the emerging Cossacks for protection against the tax policies and other expansionist strategies of the new governors. The relationship between Cossacks and Ruthenian peasants became so close that by the mid-17th century they formed a military quasi-state, the Zaporozhian host. Seeing the Cossacks as useful in the fight against the Turks and the Tatars, Poland exercised little to no control over this state. However, the ruthless treatment of the locals by the Polish overlords, combined with the harassment of the Orthodox Church, prompted the Cossacks to take up arms against the Polish papal state. In 1648, Cossacks entered Kiev victoriously and formed the Cossack Hetmanate, which flourished for just over a century, when Tsar Russia conquered the area after the defeat of the Cossacks and their allies, the Swedes, in the Great Northern War, 1700 to 1721. However, the Cossacks remained until 1764 to 1781, when Catherine the Great incorporated much of central Ukraine into the Russian Empire, and the Cossack Hetmanate and Zaporozhian Sich were abolished. In 1783, Russia annexed Crimea, and the territories now called Novorossiya were opened to settlement by Russians. The Tsarist Russification policy suppressed the use of the Ukrainian language and restricted Ukrainian national identity. After the disintegration of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the western part of present-day Ukraine was divided between Russia and Habsburg-ruled Austria in 1795. Beginning in the 19th century, there was an exodus from Ukraine to distant areas of the Russian Empire. Reportedly, by the end of the century, 223,000 ethnic Ukrainians lived in Siberia and 102,000 in Central Asia. Another 1.6 million migrated eastward in the decade following the opening of the Trans-Siberian Railway in 1906. The far eastern areas with ethnic Ukrainian populations became known as Green Ukraine. In the 19th century, Ukrainian nationalism grew, especially in Austro-Hungarian Galicia. Ukrainians entered World War I both on the side of the Central Powers under Austria and on the side of the Triple Entente under Russia. About 3.5 million Ukrainians fought on the side of the Imperial Russian Army, 250,000 on the side of the Austro-Hungarian Army. After the Russian Revolution, a Ukrainian national movement again emerged, and in 1917, the short-lived Ukrainian People's Republic was established, and then forcibly transformed into the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, which became a founding member of the Soviet Union in 1922, USSR. In the meantime, Western Ukraine was incorporated into Poland, while what is now Bukovina was occupied by Romania, and Carpathian Ruthenia was admitted to Czechoslovakia as an autonomy. In Poland, the Polish government openly propagated anti-Ukrainian sentiment and restricted the rights of people who professed Ukrainian nationality and belonged to the Eastern Orthodox Church. As a result, a Ukrainian nationalist and militant underground movement emerged in the 1920s and 1930s, which gradually morphed into the Ukrainian Military Organization and later the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, OUN. In the 1920s, the National Communist leadership pursued the policy of Ukrainization, which was part of the Soviet policy of Karenization, literally indigenization, and promoted a national renaissance of Ukrainian culture and language. Beginning in the late 1920s, a centrally planned economy was introduced, and Soviet Ukraine participated in an industrialization program that quadrupled its industrial output in the 1930s. But first, the Ukrainian peasantry suffered from the program of collectivization of agricultural crops. Collectivization was part of the first 5-year plan and was enforced by regular troops and the secret police known as the Cheka. Those who resisted were arrested and deported to gulags and work camps. Members of the collective farms were not allowed to receive grain until unrealistic quotas were met, and millions starved to death in a famine that became known as the Holodomor, or Great Famine. The Holodomor was recognized by some countries as genocide caused by Joseph Stalin and his government, who were also responsible for the mass killings during the Civil War, collectivization, and the Great Terror. After the invasion of Poland in September 1939, German and Soviet troops divided the Polish territory. Thus, Eastern Galicia and Volhynia, with their Ukrainian population, became part of Ukraine. For the first time in history, the nation was united. However, on June 22, 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union, triggering nearly 4 years of all-out war. During the encirclement battle for Kiev, the city was hailed as a hero city for its fierce resistance. The fall is considered the largest encirclement in the history of warfare in terms of the number of troops. It was part of Operation Barbarossa, the Axis invasion of the Soviet Union. Kiev suffered considerable damage and was occupied by the Nazis until November 6, 1943. Of the estimated 8.6 million Soviet troop losses, 1.4 million were ethnic Ukrainians. Victory Day is observed as one of 10 Ukrainian national holidays. Ukrainian population losses in the war were 40 to 44% of the total USSR losses. Ukraine was severely damaged by the war, and it took considerable effort to rebuild it. More than 700 cities and towns and 28,000 villages were destroyed. The situation was aggravated by a famine in 1946 to 1947, caused by a drought, and the destruction of infrastructure due to the war. In 1945, the Ukrainian SSR became one of the founding members of the United Nations. In the post-war ethnic cleansing, Ukrainians were the second largest group after Russians, accounting for 20% of the total number of adult special deportees. In addition, over 450,000 ethnic Germans from Ukraine and more than 200,000 Crimean Tatars were victims of forced deportations. After Stalin's death in 1953, Nikita Khrushchev became the new leader of USSR. As first secretary of the Communist Party of the Ukrainian SSR in 1938 to 1949, Khrushchev was intimately familiar with the republic and began to emphasize friendship between the Ukrainian and Russian nations. In 1954, Crimea was transferred from the Russian SFSR to the Ukrainian SSR. Soviet Ukraine soon became a leading European industrial center and an important center of the Soviet defense industry and high-tech research. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, Ukraine finally regained its independence in 1991. Since then, it has been governed as a unitary republic with a semi-presidential system. It declared itself a neutral state, entered into a limited military partnership with Russia and other countries, CIS, and also entered into a partnership with NATO in 1994. In 2013, there were mass protests and demonstrations known as the Euromaidan, which evolved into a revolution of dignity that led to the installation of a new government. These events led to Russia's annexation of Crimea and a war in the Donbass against Russian-backed separatists that culminated in a Russian invasion in February 2022. Amid the ongoing war with Russia, Ukraine continues to seek closer economic, political, and military ties with the West, especially NATO. We hope you enjoyed this video. Share, like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more insights.